Hi, I'm Kelsey from Crafting for Weeks, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make these granny stripe pumpkins. And this is the small version. Here you can take a look at the medium version. It also comes in a large, and I will show you how to do a squash variation of this towards the end of the video. You can find the written version of this pattern on my blog. Now to get started, you're going to need some bulky weight yarn. This is Charisma Loops and Threads from Michaels, and I'm using a 6mm crochet hook. I will put links for all of those in the description below. Now to get started, you're going to leave yourself a tail of about 18 to 24 inches. And once you have that set apart, you're going to go ahead and do a slip knot as usual. I like to cross my tail over the top and then yarn over and pull through with my working yarn. That's just how I do all my slip knots. So we're going to start with a chain of 24 for the small version of this pumpkin. You can find the stitch counts for the other sizes on my blog. But for today, we're going to be doing the small version, which is also the base of the squash. This part is not super exciting, but I just want to mention before we go on to the foundation row that if you would like to work in the back bumps of the chain, you can. In this tutorial, I'm going to just work into the chain itself. That is a personal preference for you. We're going to seam up this pumpkin and cinch it all close, so it's not going to be super obvious either way. Okay, so once you have 24, you're going to get that tail out of the way and try not to twist your chain. And we are going to slip stitch into that first chain. It is right here. The first stitch is a little bit tight, that's okay. And we are going to slip stitch and we are ready to start our first round. Okay, we're going to make a cluster in this stitch. We're going to start with a chain 3. That counts as our first double crochet of this cluster. And then we're going to work 2 more double crochets into that same stitch that we slip stitched in. So in this pattern, anywhere that there is 3 double crochets in a space, that is a cluster. If you are reading this pattern from my blog or from the PDF, that is what I'm talking about. Okay, we've worked those 2 double crochets and then we chain 1. We're going to skip 2 chains and then we're going to do 3 double crochets in that third chain. So we are going to work 3 double crochets in the same space. I am working under the assumption that you are familiar with a double crochet stitch. If you are not, I have a video that I will link above and you can just go ahead and click over there and look at the stitch breakdown. So once we've completed 3 double crochets, we are going to chain 1 and skip 2 stitches, and we are going to continue this pattern around. So 3 double crochets in the same space and then chain 1, skip 2 stitches, and we are going to end up with 8 clusters and 8 chain spaces. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the last cluster of this round and pick it up there with you. Okay, so we have 5 stitches left. We're going to go ahead and skip those 2 and work a cluster in our last cluster space. So 3 double crochets in this space. And then we are going to chain 1 and skip 2 stitches. So here's our chain. We're going to skip these last 2 and we're going to join right here to the top of this chain 3. Now for this pumpkin, I'm going to be changing colors each row. So I'm going to do my join with a new color, and I'm going with this taupe color. So let me go ahead and grab my new color here. And what I'm going to do is insert my hook like I'm doing a regular join into the chain 3 space. I like to go under both loops, but now we're going to pick up this second color and we're going to pull that through the 2 loops and the chain on my hook. So the next step is chain 1, and that kind of locks everything in place for the time being. And we need to switch colors. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this. So I have my scissors, and I'm going to leave about 2 inches to tie these off at the end. I'm not going to do it right now, but at the end you would tie these together. So I have my new color. I have my end here that I started with. That's my starting tail. And I am looking at that chain 1. So now I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to pull this tail to the side because it's not tied off yet, but I want to make sure that it's on the correct side of the stitch. So I'm just kind of move that out of the way. I'm going to skip the first chain of my foundation row and work into the second chain. And I'm going to do my first cluster into the second chain on the foundation row. So the clusters are going to be worked exactly the same. We're going to do 3 double crochets into that same chain space. And as we're doing that, we're kind of working around the chain space from the previous row that we just did. And it's wrapping the stitch around the previous row and stretching it to the row 2 rows prior. So now we're going to chain 1 and skip the cluster and work into that second second skipped chain, from the foundation row. And we're going to do 3 double crochets into that chain space. And once I've finished this cluster, I'll pause and kind of show you what this should look like. So that's 3 double crochets into the chain space, and these clusters are lining up in between the other clusters. So chain 1, skip the cluster, work into the second skipped chain from the foundation row, and we are going to repeat that cluster, and we are going to do this all the way around. So I am going to finish this cluster and my chain, and then I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the last cluster of the row. Okay, so here we are between the last 2 clusters, and this is going to be our 8th cluster of the round. We're going to go ahead and work the 3 double crochets into the second skipped chain as we've been doing. Once we've done that, we're going to chain 1, and let's go ahead and take a look at the stitch really quick. You can see these gaps. You don't have to worry too much about those because we're going to address them when we close the pumpkin. Now at this point we need to change color. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook because I'm ready to change color. And I'm going to snip my thread 2 inches. And I'm going to choose my next color, which is going to be this cream color. So I'm going to pick up the yarn, just making a small loop, pull it through both stitches, and then chain 1 to lock it in place. So once that is done, I can turn it. Now you're going to want to turn at the end of each row. Don't forget to do that. And pull this tail out of the way so I can start working into the cluster from 2 rows below, which now there's 3 stitches. So we're going to work into the center of the cluster, so the second double crochet. And I'm going to work 3 double crochets into the second double crochet of this cluster. Then I'm going to chain 1. Oh, give me a second. And then I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to skip this cluster from the previous round, and I'm going to work my next cluster in the second double crochet of the cluster from 2 rounds before. And this is the process that's going to take you all the way through the pumpkin. We're going to continue doing clusters in the center of the cluster 2 rows prior. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to anchor the granny stripe stitch to itself. So there's not going to be any holes in between because the stitches are going to connect to each other, but it's still going to have the same basic effect that you're looking for with the granny stripe stitch. The biggest overall difference is going to be the granny stripe stitch would work only in the chain space from the previous round, and so we are just taking it a little bit further and connecting it to the row below that. Hopefully that makes sense. Now you're going to want to continue working your rounds like this, doing your color changes if that's what you choose to do, anchoring your stitches, and you're going to do this for a total of 9 rounds, and then I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead and show you how to do the 10th and final round to finish up your small pumpkin, and I'm also going to show you how to close it up. So let's go ahead and get there. Okay, so here we are at round 10. I have already attached my new color, and I have already turned, so I am ready to work my first cluster. I'm going to work the cluster the same as we've been doing, so 3 double crochets into that center double crochet. The big difference is going to come in the chain space, and this is just for the final row. So instead of doing a chain, I'm going to do a slip stitch in the second double crochet of this cluster. So this slip stitch is going to be in place of a chain, so we're going to go right into our next cluster after we've completed that that slip stitch. So 3 double crochets into the next space. I'm gonna go through these as fast as I can. And then instead of doing any chains, I'm going to slip stitch into that second double crochet. So I'm going to do this all the way around. This is going to make sure we don't have any gaps on our last row before we close it up. So let's go ahead and skip to the closing now that you know how to do the last row. And yeah, we're almost done. Okay, so here we are at the end of the row. I'm doing my last slip stitch here in this cluster, and then I'm going to slip stitch to the first stitch. So you will need to do that to finish your round. And that's it for the crocheting part of this. We're going to give ourselves another long tail, just like we started with. Pull this through, and now it's time to address these ends. So I have not been tying my ends off as I went. You can do that if you'd like, but I prefer to just tie them all off at the end. So the first thing you're going to need to do is get them all on the inside of your pumpkin, whichever side is you decide is the inside. Pull all of your ends. I just use my hook. I grab them, pull them to the inside. I try to do it as close to the nearest hole as possible. And so once they're all on the same side, we are going to tie them off together. This is something you could do as you worked. I prefer to just do it at the end because it's quick and it doesn't require me to stop while I'm in a crocheting flow. Okay, so they are all on the inside now. So what I'm going to do is turn this whole thing inside out so I can see all my ends better. And basically I'm just going to make sure I don't mess with my tail because I still need that. Now I'm just going to tie these all together. Since this is a stuffed pumpkin, I'm not going to worry about making this neat and tidy and hiding my knots. I'm just going to literally tie them in double knots. This yarn doesn't slip much. If your yarn is slippery, you might want to like secure them further. But for this, it's pretty grippy yarn. I'm just tying 2 ends together. As long as you don't skip any ends, then this is totally secure enough for a home decor piece. Okay, so once we have all of our ends taken care of, we're going to flip this right side out. So real quick, I just want to point out where the seam is. This is our first row of clusters and the seam is right next to it. And yeah, I think it's pretty inconspicuous as far as pumpkins go. So let's go ahead and take a look at the structure so we can finish putting it together. So we're going to make sure all our ends stay inside. Those will just be extra stuffing. And we are going to need to close up the bottom first. So I have a tapestry needle and we are going to close up the bottom and also simultaneously address those gaps that we left in our foundation chain. And so what we're going to do here is go in and out of these holes we left by working those clusters here. So you can see those. We're going to just thread the tapestry needle in and back out. We're going to do this in each of those spaces around. I like to go around like 1 time. So like a full circle. And I think I went a little bit extra here actually. And then I like to cinch it closed so I can kind of see where the fabric naturally pinches together. And at this point, I'm going to adjust it to what I want it to look like, and I'm going to go around again. So if these are draping or like there's too big of a gap here, I'm going to just push it forward and thread the tapestry needle through those spaces. So basically, I'm just shaping the bottom of the pumpkin to look like what I want it to look like as I'm closing it. So if you just go through like 4 spaces and you go through those 4 again, it's gonna just have 4 spaces at the end. If you push those clusters that we skipped up and then thread the needle through those, you're gonna get a better, flatter result at the bottom, especially when you stuff it. Stuffing is going to make a huge difference in how this looks. Okay, so my rule of thumb when I'm closing a pumpkin is if I pull this string tight and that doesn't move, then it's good. So I've gone through enough times. So I'm content with that. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the needle in through the center, and then I'm going to tie this off. Pardon me for a moment here while I struggle with my tapestry needle. And then what I'm going to do is just basically pick up a little bit of fabric from the inside with my needle, tie it off, and yeah, that's just how I like to finish my pumpkins. I'm going to leave this thread on the inside, and again, just a little extra stuffing. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing with the top of the pumpkin. Let's go ahead and get this tapestry needle on here. And we're going to go and do the same process, but just to keep it simple, I'm going to work through the slip stitches because that just makes it really easy for me to know exactly where to work because we don't have the same holes at the top of this pumpkin. So in and out through the slip stitches makes it a nice even spacing. Spacing was the word I was looking for there. And then once I've gone around once, I'm going to do just like a very light cinching so I can see the closing. And at this point we need to stuff it. So, okay, I have found my stuffing. So I'm using a polyester filling to stuff this pumpkin. You don't have to use this. You can use old yarn scraps. I have bought pillows, like new bed pillows, at like a box store for pretty cheap and salvage the stuffing from those. So if you don't have access to craft filling or it's not in your budget, there's definitely other options to stuff this. But as I'm going here, what I'm trying to do is stuff around the outside edges and create a shape that I like. So I like to kind of leave myself a little hole in the center because that's where I'm going to put my stem. And I put my stem in before I close. So I'm kind of just stuffing it, and then I'll cinch it closed just a little bit, see if I like the shape. If I'm happy with it, then I'll do my stem. Now here, I just salvaged a stick from my yard. And I like to put this in before I close, and it honestly just slides out really easy, which I like if I decide to stack my pumpkins. But you can also do a little bit of hot glue as you're closing if you want that more secure. So I'm going to put my stem in, I'm going to cinch this, and then basically I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the bottom of going around that circle again with my needle. Now I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to show you my finished pumpkin, and I'm going to reuse this particular sample to make the squash for you. Okay, so after going around the top edge, tying it off and tucking the yarn inside, this is what it would look like. This is the small version. If you were doing one of the other sizes, the stitch counts are a little bit bigger, so they would make a bigger pumpkin. Some pumpkins I put like ribbing with like yarn to just shape them, but I didn't do that with these ones. I kind of like them as they are. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the squash portion of this video and show you how to make the modifications to make the acorn squash shape. Okay, so we are starting with the same base as the pumpkin, which is the 8 clusters, and I've already closed this one because this was my sample from the small pumpkin, but I've backed up to where I completed row 7 and I've attached the yarn for row 8. So you've done 7 rows the exact same way, and we're starting row 8 here to do a decrease round. So we're going to do our first cluster right here, and it is the same as we have been doing up until now, which is 3 double crochets into this center double crochet from 2 rows below, and we're going to chain 1, skip our cluster, and then work into this one right here. We're doing another cluster exactly the same way. And let me get this tangle taken care of. I will finish my cluster here, and then our next cluster is going to be a decrease. So we're going to decrease over these 2 spaces. So it's going to kind of pinch this in. So how we're going to start is we're going to do 1 double crochet here as if we were starting a new cluster. We are going to do the first half, so yarn over, pull through 2, but do not pull through the last 2. Yarn over and pull through 2 in the next center double crochet, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. That counts as your second double crochet. Now work 1 double crochet in the next cluster space, and then chain 1, and that completes our decrease cluster. So we're going to work 2 more regular clusters in the next 2 spaces. So we'll go ahead and go through this part slowly so I'm not skipping ahead too fast. So here is our second cluster, and then we're going to work 1 more decrease cluster before we finish this round. So I will talk you through that here in a second. Okay, so we're going to decrease over these 2 spaces, and so let me do my chain. So double crochet into the center stitch, and then we're going to do that half. It's a double crochet 2 together. So yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and then in your next space, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, then yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over and do our last double crochet of this cluster. Oop, got a little knot there. Do our last double crochet of this cluster, chain 1, and then we are going to join right here. So just like we've been doing in the other spaces. At this point, I'm going to change color, and I have 6 clusters now instead of 8 because I've decreased twice. I'm going to go ahead and pick up a new color. Again, we're just using the exact same technique that we did for the bottom portion of the pumpkin. So you might notice as you go that the circumference of the top is now smaller. So as I'm working this section, I've decided to go ahead and tie off my ends just because they're a little bit easier to access, and I can't turn this one inside out as easy as before since the bottom is closed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up my new color, turn my work, and then I'm going to work the next round as normal. So this is pretty similar to before. Your biggest change is you need to pay attention to where your clusters are. So your double crochet 2 together clusters where we did our decreases, you need to make sure to skip that entire thing. So this whole little arch shape that we've made here, we want to skip this whole thing and work into the following space. So if you don't skip that, you're going to end up with the exact same number of clusters, and you're not going to get your shaping that you're looking for. Okay, then you're going to do your clusters in between as normal. If you remember, we just did 2 clusters in between each of those decreases. So we are going to do those here really quick. I'm going to fast forward because we have already seen me do these a couple times now. And then we're going to pause here at the next decrease. So here is our next decrease. You can kind of see where that is. And we want to skip it and work into this one. So just make sure you don't work into that center cluster in the middle of that decrease. Skip it all together. You might notice that I tucked it in because it puckers out a little bit, but as you go, just tuck it in. So we have 1 more cluster to finish the round, and then we're going to chain and switch colors. Our rounds are going a little bit faster because now we have 6 instead of 8. So this is where we're going to do our color change. Then I'm going to do 1 more round with you to show you how to work into the decreases. Okay, I've skipped ahead. I've already done my first couple clusters, and this is the cluster that works into our decrease stitch. So here you can see that double crochet 2 together right there in the center. That's the stitch you want to work your cluster into. So just find the top of that one, and that's where you're going to place your cluster. And yeah, that's the gist of this round. After that, all of the rounds are going to be just cluster repeats. You're going to do a total of 12 rows that have 6 clusters. So there should be 7 rows, 1 decrease, I should say rounds, 7 rounds, 1 decrease round, and then 12 rounds to form the top of this squash. And yeah, once you get done with that, you're going to close it up the exact same way as we did the pumpkin. I'm going to actually show you the closing of the top just so you have the visual, but really it's exactly the same as the pumpkin, just a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and take a look at that decrease row again, decrease stitch, sorry. So again, we're working into the top of that double crochet 2 together to place that cluster. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the last round and then we'll close it. So here we are on the last round. I've already attached my color, and this is just to show you how to do the slip stitch instead of the chain. And this is just for the last round. This is exactly the same as we did for the pumpkin, but if you didn't watch the closing of that one, instead of chaining between clusters, we're going to slip stitch into that second double crochet of the cluster. And then we're going to work our cluster, our next cluster as normal. And then instead of doing our chains around, we're going to just do slip stitches into the second double crochet of the cluster from the previous round. So just this right here, slip stitch, and then work our next one. All right, I have completed that row. I have trimmed my yarn, and here we are. I left myself a tail to close. Here are those little cluster, the decreases. I just tucked those in so they're on the inside, and I will probably tuck them again after I stuff, but here it is time to stuff this thing. This part isn't super exciting, but basically I'm going to put the stuffing in the bottom portion of the acorn squash first, and then I'm going to fill up the top part of it, and after that it's ready to close. So I already have a stem. I'm going to take my tapestry needle and I'm going to put it on my thread. And then I'm going to go through the slip stitches. So in and out of the slip stitches all the way around. If you didn't watch the pumpkin portion of this video, I do the exact same steps on the bottom. I've already closed the bottom of this because I'm using the same sample, but you will need to close the bottom in the same way. You can always back up the video and watch that if you want. Okay, so once I've gone around, I'm cinching this and I'm making a little space for my stem. I'm going to kind of tuck this in here. I like my stems to be removable. Just makes it easier for storage and stacking. So I don't glue mine in, but you can. And then once your stem is in, you're going to go around these stitches again to just really tighten that up. So yeah, again, I can pull my stems out because they're not like glued in. But they stay in while they're just being decorations, if that makes sense. If you need your stems more permanent, you might want to add glue or choose a different stem type. I actually have a blog post where I go over a bunch of different types of stems you can use for pumpkins or squash in this case. I will link that in the description below if you're curious. Okay, we're getting close. It's looking very squashy. I'm going to do a few more stitches. As a general rule of thumb, I like to continue going around this little circle through stitches until I pull this thread and nothing moves. So basically it's tight enough and the yarn has gripped enough that it just stays exactly in place. Once that happens, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of like a stitch or a little bit of fabric, and I'm going to just tie a knot. Just like that, and then I put the needle down through the pumpkin and out of a similar color space, and then I just trim it off. My end is tucked in the center, and there we go. Now for the squash, I didn't show how to pull in the ends or close the bottom, so you can always look at the timestamps and go back and watch those for the pumpkin if you need to. So there it is, all done. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and you can find the pattern for this and the bigger sizes on my blog as well as in my Etsy or Ravelry shops, and I will link those for you below.